Today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners, who for more than 25 years have successfully delivered interim and permanent leadership talent to transform businesses. To hire the talent you need to enable your business to thrive, visit www.progressotalent.com today. Dr. Maksym Sich is CEO and co-founder of Aegiq, a spin-out from Sheffield University and a venture capital-backed deep tech business using pioneering single photon and integrated quantum optics platforms to build a new generation of networking and computing within quantum technology. Originally from Ukraine, Max undertook an undergraduate degree in physics with a specialism in quantum physics before moving to the UK to undertake a PhD at the University of Sheffield. Max subsequently held postdoctoral positions at that very university. So what's the story behind the story? Without further ado, let's get into it. Max, good morning. Welcome. Great to have you on as our guest on the Astrology podcast, and really looking forward to what is going to be a fascinating conversation and journey this morning. But as is customary with the Astrology podcast, I'd like to start first and foremost with the early days. And I'm right in saying that you grew up in Ukraine. So tell us, what was childhood like for you?
Hi. Well, firstly, thanks for having me. It's really, really good to have the chance to chat with you. And yeah, it's true. I was born in Ukraine, in Kyiv. So that's where I was living until I finished my undergrad, my master's degree. It was an interesting time. Obviously, the Soviet Union fell. We were transitioning into the new world. We were also transitioning technologies from analog telephones to digital. So, when I started learning, I had to go to library to read books. When I finished, I was doing it all on the internet.
Interesting. So what were your, or who, I should say, were your heroes as a child? Who did you look up to?
I don't think there was a particular person I was overly kind of obsessed with, but I think I was always fascinated with the work that scientists did and, engineers. I think that was just something that was very attractive. And one feat of engineering that was always fascinating, and still is the aviation and space, in fact. Primarily because you could trace it, like from the very basic things like the almost paper planes, all the way into the advanced machines and like the heavy lifters and the jumbo jets. And just seeing that, huge thing in the air, just flying, not falling, it was really exciting, especially as a child.
Where did that sort of inspiration stem from? Where was there a moment that you first recall that you think that was what inspired me with that spark?
Maybe some family links, with the aviation and actually technology and engineering. Probably not without that, of course. But also, that's because it was, you could see the planes flying every day. So somehow they were flying over our houses. And it's just something that was fairly simple, if you want, in terms of you could trace it back not too far ago. So you could relate to that very easily. Like even any other things like, building bridges. People have been doing that for thousands of years. Whilst the first aeroplane and the first commercial airline, it was all like almost like happened yesterday. And, people were still alive who started the an aircraft company, and they were still there. So they were like already pretty old at that point, but nevertheless, they were, the founders were still there. It's like it's probably the way you can think about it as a discovery type thing, as a venture. And if I draw a parallel with quantum here, as we're probably there right now with quantum where aviation was a good 100 years ago. So it's really early days. It's really personal as well sometimes, so because it's so small yet, but it's about to change everything.
Actually, my father was involved as part of the team that were building the wings for Concorde. So to your point around advances in technology and the fact that that sort of tangible, and it did feel, I agree, aviation just feels like recent history in comparison to, so many of the things that we look at. So yeah, I can understand that perhaps gazing skyward and seeing that. Was there a point from a study perspective when first you started to think about, well, hey, how do they hang up there? How do these things work? Did you start to take naturally that interest in the how, not just the why?
Yeah, I think I'm just naturally a very curious person, so I always ask that question. And like why things are the way they are, and probably why I'm doing physics or did physics, because that's the way you find answers, or place where you find answers to many things. I actually ended up doing aircraft modeling as a teenager.
So there wasn't perhaps and we'll come on to computing, but was there an aspiration perhaps to look at aviation as a career choice, to work with aircraft or something along those sorts of lines at any point?
Yeah, I think it was a kid. Yeah, I think it was something interesting. At that point, we didn't know about quantum.
Yeah. So where does the interest, because I was fascinated by your academic background. You've got an undergraduate, and correct me if I get any of this wrong, an undergraduate degree in physics with a specialism in quantum physics, a master's in quantum, a PhD, but you've combined that with a degree in finance and economics.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing, it's the other thing that you're interested about, like how the society works and, why things are the way they are. So, you go and find answers to that. And the other bit there is economics. This is a good, like, overarching subject over actually finance and sociology that combined give you a pretty solid picture of the world around you.
And when did you start to, as you recall, first sort of gain that interest in the broader society, in the economic landscape, or what stimulated that?
I think it was like late teens or like beginning of like my undergrad, because you just see that, you read things in the newspapers and you don't get what you read. Like, our monetary policy is like too strict. What does it mean? Like, how do you make a conclusion about that statement from, let's say, a national bank or a finance minister? And you do want to make a judgment, an educated judgment about it. So, like, how do you figure out the exchange rate of currency?
Have you always had that natural tendency to want to ask questions, to just, rather than accept, but actually to say why?
Yeah, I think my parents really suffered when I was a kid.
You were that kid that was always asking why.
Yeah.
It's clearly stood you in good stead.
Hopefully. You really want to learn why and why things are the way they are. You're just looking for the answer.
So on the point of questioning and asking why or what, or evidencing a natural curiosity, for my benefit, and certainly I suspect one or two of those that might be listening, what is quantum? And more specifically, perhaps, what is quantum computing? Or perhaps that in itself is a naive question. The two are intrinsically linked.
Well, quantum is, it's just a generic word we tend to describe a part of, or a set of like knowledge, physics, technology that relates to a very fine type of phenomenon in the world. And it's funny because the word quantum actually comes from the Greek quanta, means one, or quantity. So when you go down to like a single atom, a single electron, a single like photon, and how it interacts with the likewise atoms, photons, electrons, nuclei, neutrons, and other particles, this is where physics works. There's slightly different laws of physics which describe it on that level, and what we see in our everyday world, like how we perceive the world around us, as something like built of billions and billions of these particles around us, or zillions. And when you compare like behavior of an individual over a billion of those, you have one versus a group effect, basically. And so it does work differently. And so quantum is just a generic term that's used to describe anything that's derived from quantum theory, which is then describing a single particle type interactions. Like how do you describe a single photon? How do you describe a single electron? And in physics, you start a single electron in a vacuum where nothing else exists. That's your undergrad physics course, and obviously it's pretty abstract at that level. But then you very quickly develop that into something that's useful, and that's what science has been doing for the last 70 years is translating that simple approaches into more advanced, complicated theory and understanding how things work. And insofar, everything's proven to be in line with predictions, and that way to describe it. So, in terms of using quantum physics for devices, it's been used for a long time. So, for example, all semiconductor devices that we use in our microchips, like CCD cameras, they called quantum 1.0, if you want, because they use that quantum theory, except they do not distill down to single particle level. What we're doing now is quantum computing, quantum communications, quantum sensing, and I would like to point out that these three are kind of main pillars of this quantum 2.0 is when you literally leverage the effects of this single particle properties, or particle-particle interaction. And one of those, and is something that doesn't exist in, say, we don't know how it feels on our level, is entanglement. It means what it sounds. So if you have two entangled particles, then they kind of feel each other at any distance almost. And if you impact one of those, the other feels that, and they almost become as one. And it's pretty kind of unusual concept, but it leads you to a lot of interesting ways how to describe and how you can actually use it to do things in a new way.
So what was it that first ignited your interest in quantum?
I think it was the most difficult course. And that's how it started. So it sounded, okay, that's challenging. Why not? At that point, I didn't know about where it's heading, how the technology is going to develop, or anything like that. So it was pure study. But at the same time, by the time I started, or actually finished doing my PhD, we already started seeing that the amount of science that's been developed in the world and in the UK as well was such that people started thinking about how do we turn that into business. So UK was the first country to bring in National Quantum Technology Program in 2014. And we have seen it firsthand how it was developing. So from how you translate some scientific ideas into more engineering ideas and prototypes, now that's been moved all the way into the commercial space. And so it's really just the beginning of the deployment of quantum technology into our life across many, many sectors. It's at the point where we can literally, build already actual devices that work, and it could be, the reliability is there, the manufacturing, supply chain is getting there. So it becomes possible to build a business model around it, or actually use it for existing business models, which is even better.
So what was behind the UK's, you made mention that UK was the first country to formalise some sort of proposition around quantum? Is that a fair way of assessing it? And why, how? What was it about the UK that meant that we were able to take the lead in that respect?
Well, it just happened that the UK was one of the leading countries where there was a lot of quantum research has been done, and it's down to people like Sir Peter Knight, who've been actually leading this activity. And it was clear that there is enough, and it's the right time to start doing it, because there was sufficient body of knowledge that it was ready to be put together. People always, when they do science, they always think what's next. I mean, there's a level of purely scientific interest, but then there's always people who think, okay, that was really interesting. Can we? What else? What happens with this next technology? I mean, what's the benefit for the society for it? And there's different benefits, right? So you can be studying dark matter or the composition of space, and it's just answering fundamental questions like why it is the way it is. Or, once you've studied understand the basics of quantum, or how electrons behave or how photons behave, is there anything useful for the society in this? And then if yes, then why not?
Well, I mean, one of the questions which seems now, given what you've just described, as almost a daft question, but I was once told that there's no such thing as a daft question, only the question you don't ask. But one of the questions that sprung to mind is, so what's the potential for quantum? But it strikes me, not quite, perhaps it is infinite.
Well, it's limited by the globe, right?
Yeah.
By the society, because ultimately we have 7 billion people living on the world on the globe. So that's the scope of the impact they can have. Like, having knowledge about physics is one thing, and having that part of our lives is like when our lives are and where they are. So it is going to have profound impact actually, on pretty much everything that we do, because you start with, for example, sensing. Quantum sensors are so much more sensitive than anything else that you have, that you can do, like, non-destructive, non-invasive testing of gravity to see where the pipes are, like seeing behind the corners, for example, or just measuring brain activity without any actual impact. So it's a huge range of things there. Then you talk about communication. So we've really changed in the way the communications are going to work. And think about the parallel, like how digital changed the communication from analog, when we would, write letters, give a call on the landline, and how we communicate today. How is it? It's very, very different. So quantum is bringing similar, then the digital computers came in. So you no longer were using the mechanical calculator, but you suddenly were, it was a microcalculator, and then you have a computer. You can do everything. You can sit in a single place in the earth and run a business without actually leaving your home. And like 20 years ago, it was impossible. You had to go somewhere, meet people. You still do it, but you just sit in the same chair. And so quantum is going to have the same thing. So it's different level of security. It's different level of just communicating. And it's different level of how you compute as well. So it unlocks the possibility to do much, much higher performance calculation in certain types of problems. And so it will just coexist with the existing infrastructure. We still write letters, still send postcards for Christmas. It's fine. We still meet together. We still go out together. We're still going to write emails in the way we do it, except the data transmission might be done by a quantum channel, which ensures it's faster and more secure, literally on a different level. Or we might run a simulation task for optimized, speaking of aviation, wing design, which is currently impossible and even on the high-performance computing clusters, and just came out with super efficient aircraft, maybe. And that's all what quantum did. At the same time, you might have a hacker that is going to sit there and crack all your passwords, which are only digital, or like old-school encryption, that's super weak against that. So that's a huge threat as well. So it's always a double-edged sword.
So tell me, what was the inspiration behind Aegiq?
So we wanted to really bring access to quantum data just to the world, and ensure that people in the years to come can really trust their daily interactions with devices. It's already challenging with digital. How do you know that the email is real? How do you know that the call you've received is the correct one? And we're all aware of the multiple ways spamming and phishing works. And with more and more devices, your fridge is connected to internet. How's that going to work? Or your washing machine? And it's just a simple thing, but there's a lot more to that. It's bank transaction. Somebody got your health records stored in the cloud. Is it safe? How do you ensure that it's unconditionally secure? And quantum offers you that. So it's a combined thing where you want to ensure integrity for the society in the long run. You also enable new business models on this, the same way you enable new business models with digital technology. And so we want to provide that access and that capability overall. It was a coincidence that there was really exciting technology that we managed to patent at the university. We saw the opportunity, we saw the market growing, and ultimately, we have an absolutely fantastic founder team, and we have a fantastic team inside the company as our core engineering R&D team. So when it was all coming together, I think we were set up for a very exciting business.
What was it that you set out to achieve?
Is the ability to bring this to the world. That's probably the most exciting. I mean, there's obviously, as a business you want to grow. There's an ambitious business you want to grow a lot into a Fortune 500 ranking somewhere. So that's part of the ambition, of course. But it's there for a reason.
In terms of the challenges that you've experienced along the way, or might anticipate in realising that vision maybe, what sorts of challenges have you faced so far, and what do you anticipate facing moving forward?
Well, I'll start with the fact that this is a deep tech business. It's a hardware business, and it requires a lot of resource, like physical resource. You've got to build a facility where you do things. We have a workshop facility which is equipped. We develop our supply chain. So in that sense, when people talk about startups, a lot of the startup world has been, quite rightly so, dominated by digital technology. So it's software, then it was AI, but again, it's software. And there was a little bit, it started to appear, a little bit of on innovation in terms of semiconductor devices and optimized for that. Then the biotech started appearing and making it is a separate, huge branch of deep tech. And now it's quantum. So there's a different perception, a different way you evaluate this type of business against, for example, a more conventional, say, developing an app to, do something. I always say that the ultimate other end to us is a next dating app. So we have to be, from an investor perspective, what we're doing should be more exciting than that. And exciting means better returns.
Yeah.
And quantum has that potential exactly because it's just going to grow a lot. And it does require more patience, of course. And there's additional, as I said, challenges because it's hardware. So you have not to just assemble the team, but you have to run operations around it and work with the supply chain. Another challenge is, of course, dealing with larger universities as well, because the agility is not there, maybe not always as the right mindset in terms of how to deal with this. And universities commercialize IP, but we are building a huge business, and these are slightly different mindsets about how you go around things and how you develop it. So negotiating this was obviously a big challenge. I mean, the other challenge is, of course, talent. So there's not so many quantum, they call it quantum workforce. I'm not so keen on this word, but people who know quantum physics or know of it and understand the key implications and can work in that context, even software development, for example. So all these things together mean that it was an extra challenge. And add to that the COVID. That started about the time we created Aegiq. Literally 2 months after we started Aegiq, we were all locked down everywhere around the world. And apart from difficulty communicating, which resulted in the fact that we now have all video calls, digital technology caught up with it. We now, there's this huge supply chain issues all over the place, and all that disruption impacts as well. So you have to have extra resilience planning for it.
How much of a challenge, you mentioned the longevity of the proposition, to your point that actually we've read much over recent times as to, particularly from a digital perspective and a software perspective, the ability for investors to flip and realize a lucrative return in relatively short timescales. And yet, to your point, yours, a deep tech proposition, hardware proposition requires patience, requires understanding. Is there an investor community with a maturity and depth of understanding to appreciate that you're building for the long term, and therefore does attracting the right kind of back? Is that also a bit of a challenge?
Yeah, well, there's less investors with that mindset. I mean, it's very much changing. So I think it's very dynamic space as well. So you compare now to 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and 5 years ago, and you'll see the amount of investors who are putting money into deep tech and making conscious decision to make that bet growing quite, I would say it's a very good and steady growth. I wouldn't be able to give exact number, but it may be doubling each year or something like this. So part of that is because digital is somewhat running out of steam. I mean, it's not to say that there are no good opportunities out there, but all these technologies are now being pretty mature. They don't carry as much opportunity and as much risk anymore. So if you start a software project, you can be very precise about calculating the risks and how you mitigate them. And that means that returns are also going to be very much calculated. So it's less of a venture at that point. At the same time, deep tech businesses, they have the potential to make much, much higher returns for an investor, except they need to wait a little bit longer than, say, a year. So the horizon is slightly longer, but the returns are much, it's a different order of magnitude.
And from a talent perspective, to your point, I'm guessing it's a global talent pool. I'd imagine it's a fiercely competitive talent pool as well. How do you overcome that? How do you tackle that?
Well, we're an attractive company as well, because of what we're doing. That's the reason why we exist. It's exciting on its own. So, of course, you have issues about the mobility, talent mobility, people mobility, capital mobility across the world, and you feel it, especially if there's less amount of people in terms of available to do things. So that's something actually that's been brought up to the governments as well. And we recently had a workshop, in fact, between UK and US industries, which I moderated on what to do next and how do we work with the governments to enable that mobility, that liquidity in interactions, because it's critical for the industry, for the value chain to move fast. Because if you have visa problems, if the capital is not allowed to come in across the border, that happens, in fact, and that stops, and that's an extra barrier.
You started back in 2019, I think I'm right in saying it. With the benefit of hindsight, I was going to ask the question as to what it is that you would do differently. If we could strip out COVID, that would have offered a layer of complexity that I suspect many of us weren't anticipating from the get-go. But looking back with that benefit of hindsight, is there anything that you would have done differently when you go back 3 years?
A lot. Of course, a lot. I think what we wouldn't do differently is we wouldn't change our vision. So we set out straight away with an exciting ambition that's really literally, driven us through all the difficult times. There's plenty of operational things, plenty of how we manage relationship with large stakeholders, including universities, how we would do it differently. That's for sure. I think as I said, it's a generic issue of how you position yourself in the market for investment, and venture capital is almost virtually unlimited, but it's a very expensive source of capital. So you have to have a super high return on everything you raise. That's the beauty and the challenge there. But for sure, I think we would set up very different how we work specifically with the technology transfer offices, and that would be a very different thing.
From your perspective, from what you've seen, you mentioned that the UK was one of the early instigators or early initiators of all that quantum could realise. Is the ecosystem to facilitate your success? Is it mature enough? Is it there? Is there what sort of changes would you like to see happen around you that could facilitate or strengthen your proposition, or indeed those of others that are in the space?
Well, I think that's really developing in the right direction right now. It's a little bit even the arms race in quantum technology between countries. China is probably the major player there as well, which adds to the contest. So there's a very good awareness in every government in the world. There's very good awareness actually in every large corporate around the world about the fact that you need to move on with this. and you need to do something with quantum. You need to invest in it. So in that sense, I think we're in a very favorable environment right now. So all of the quantum technology businesses in general have that good tailwind right now. But it's still a lot to do. I mean, we can talk about specifics about how, governments can help invest in the local infrastructure in terms of manufacturing, high value manufacturing of, say, materials, which is underlying making of anything. And quantum requires new processes to be established. So, stimulating that sector, which isn't if you're just doing materials manufacturing, it's not exactly quantum, but it's really enabling. And we've seen many cases where, some advances in manufacturing and breakthroughs there, which seemed like a very, topical and niche, really have a huge impact on the wider stakeholders who buy in that bit for their kit. Again, I feel like there's this awareness, and this probably just needs more work in terms of establishing that. And that probably comes in another context, that we need to rethink generally globally how the supply chains work around the world and the security of supply chains. And the latest, COVID showed how fragile that thing is when everything is kind of Kanban delivery across the world through the oceans, and a single ship that's got stuck in a channel somewhere can disrupt everybody in an instant. Or a closed port somewhere could do this. And then you add the issues which relates to sensitive topics. Where do you maintain the talent that just generally people who are aware how to do things, and that the whole industry exists? My personal preference is that we do really need to move to a more distributed model where you should be able to do it everywhere. So it shouldn't be just China where you manufacture semiconductors. Initially they did it because all the assets they're very poisonous. They were always leaking, and nobody wanted, and China was happy to accept that risk. Right now, it's very different. I mean, a very advanced country. All the manufacturing, it's all actually quite safe and developed. And now we just have a huge supply chain out of no particular necessity. But also the security. I mean, if somebody stops the port working for whatever reason, then the whole world is dependent on that. And it's probably not the way to go around it. And we have distributed computing, which is more resilient. We have distributed ledgers, which are more like secure way to ensure the data integrity. We have, the food's grown distributed ways. Why do we not have a manufacturing which is distributed? And I think there's a good case for, Industry 4.0 to actually make it a big play once we're moving to a new technological step change overall.
Was there a pivotal moment for Aegiq that you would attribute to the success that you've enjoyed to date?
I think it was our persistence that was from the start, and this goes back to the team, to the founding team. I think it's super important because we literally had so many. We've been told no a lot of times. That's normal, but surviving through that requires a good team. It requires good people. You're much, much stronger, more. You can achieve a lot more with that. So we knew that what we were thinking is great, and we just were looking for people who were on the same wave with us, if you want. So once you found it, it's easier. You gain the momentum, you gain the crowd with you, and so it's good. I mean, obviously, that wouldn't be possible also without, say, government programs and support, but it's all in a context. I mean, it's all part of the ecosystem. It's a private investment. There's government stimulus out there so that you can actually do it locally and not go to just a particular single place. So it's many variables in that equation. So I wouldn't say there is a single stakeholder that is able to really make it or break it.
What do you think are the three most important things that you've learned as a result of the businesses that you've built to date?
Well, the team is the first thing. Second, you've got to be absolutely clear, and it's just the confirmation. but I think it's really important for anybody in any life situation is to be clear why you're doing what you're doing, and be a little bit critical on yourself, and not let you fool your own, not to fool yourself by yourself, and be super clear about why exactly you're doing what you're doing. So that ensures that integrity, and that's super critical to achieve whatever you set to do. That's probably the two main bits.
Okay. So what really excites you about the future for Aegiq?
It's exactly why we do it, right? So it's because we can literally create an impact, and it's a technological feat to bring the quantum data. I mean, we see how, in the future, and not so distant future, people are going to come in an EE shop, and they'll be, okay, this is Aegiq enabled. We take it. You'll be able to touch it. So it's converting that quantum physics into things that you can touch, feel, and use in one way or the other. And that's really exciting. I mean, it's a huge challenge as well, but that's why it's exciting. I think once you work a little bit in science as well, you get used to the fact that things got to be challenging, and then it's super interesting. That's why you wake up every day and you're like, okay, now this is hard, but we're gonna crack it.
Is there the old adage around you can choose to be a mile wide or a mile deep? Is there a sort of a laser focus on one specific application? It might be, if it's commercially sensitive, clearly I wouldn't ask you to mention it. But is there do you have that kind of focus on one particular application of quantum that really excites you, or is it a whole range?
Yeah, that's actually quantum networking for us, and then like bringing that next level of information processing. So our vision is that it's going to be a little bit different to how digital works in terms of the technology stack, but you're going to have more hybrid between computing and communication. Even though today it's kind of the same as well. Think about your home router. Right? Is it a computer or is it a communication device? It's kind of both at the same time. So with quantum, it's even be more hybridized and turning that into reality on a global scale, like literally enabling the fact that you would be able to build the same network that we currently have, but with quantum. So it's tens of billions of devices that need to be connected and with quantum ready, quantum enabled, and leverage that capability with them. I think that's a very kind of exciting prospect. And of course, that implies that there is a roadmap of development. So it's not a singular product. You roll out, that's our product, that's it, we're doing it. You could say our product is enabling networking, then it's true. There will be lots of evolutionary steps along the way. So right now we're focused, in fact, on enabling more research and in universities in actually industrial R&D. And one of the things that we have that's really key to build a lot of large-scale applications is sources of quantum light. And there's a particular, properties that are required for that to be a scalable solution. And we have that. Actually, the product release will be later this year on that when it hits the market. But it's a particular niche application, and it's just one of the steps for us how we see building more momentum and stimulating more momentum in that development.
So what other technologies are you excited by?
In general, apart from quantum, well, aviation, of course, the flight. The physics of flight, the space flight, I think space is something that we didn't talk yet, but it's a very exciting thing that happens right now. And I think what's really important, and we shouldn't forget about it, is how we make a sustainable living on Earth, and how all the great technology doesn't go into somewhere in a dump and random place and poisons half of the world population, damages it in some ways. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do, and I think that's truly that's one other very exciting area in the world which we need to do. I think it's almost like it's a lot of obligation. Everybody has to. to ensure it, because it's key to our survival. Otherwise, there needs to be a solution for recycling, for energy, to how do we ensure the level of cleanliness around us without contamination that's conductive of healthy life. And quantum also can help with that as well, because ensure, better simulation, more efficient devices. I mean, so think about this, improving efficiency of every single process that we currently have, I don't know, let's say by 10%, how much less fuel we're going to burn as a result of that. It's simple things like this. It's not exactly, you can't be super prescriptive and granularity there, but better security means that you don't waste your resource unnecessarily on dealing with data breaks. You can focus, you can allocate that resource to something else as well. So it's about changing the efficiency. It's about improving it and letting us focus on what's more important. Quantum is very much able to do it. For example, quantum sensors, they have that capability to detect the tiniest things, the smallest leaks of gases, for example, the tiniest changes in the ground. So, if you want to see, if you want to inspect a gas pipe for any leaks, you will see a very early warning compared to what you have now. And so you can do the preventative repairs and maintenance there. I mean, with gravity sensor, maybe you can figure out where that pipe is actually located under the pavement, so you don't need to bring all the heavy machinery to excavate just to find it's not there. Again, you've saved a lot of things, and optimizing logistics is another big thing. So how do you ensure that Amazon driver actually is running the optimal route? There's a role to play in many, many of these things, and which is why it's so exciting. You see, it's like it's unlimited in terms of possibilities out there.
So in terms of your own career, who has been the greatest influence on your career and why?
It's a good question. I mean, there's obviously a family influence. Why I chose to be a physicist or scientist in the first place. I would attribute a lot to my family and friends, I suppose. I think that's really important because there's support, there's ideas, there's incentives, which are super important. So probably these are the key pillars there. Obviously, I mean, you read about people, what they achieve, and that's very interesting and motivating. But I think the reason why things happen is something which is fairly close to you.
So therefore, I guess you in a way you've answered that, but who do you admire?
I think, people who are up for challenges in general, who don't shy away, and, could be a president of a country which is at war, who wasn't scared by anything. It could be an entrepreneur who started from being from a council estate, and, they made it to something really, really big and important. Or, it could be somebody who's just, a policymaker who's done the right thing. I don't want to put any specific names because then it's going to be, that person is, but it's a class of person people that I admire. And there's many people out there who really are worth admiration. So I don't want to give that palm to anybody specific. But I would just like to say that, it's great to have people and to have the society where you have people whom you can admire. And I think it's a very nice feeling when you can see somebody you can look up to and take something from them, maybe a little bit.
So what does success mean to you?
It means that I'm in peace with myself, and that I'm happy with what I'm doing. I think that's a success. And it's a universal, I think, recipe for success for anybody. In practical terms, if we move from that philosophical concept, an IPO for Aegiq would be a great success, but that's very much in line with that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that to your point, it's from a personal perspective, it's a feeling, isn't it? It's a sense of well-being that define not an event necessarily. It's a feeling itself.
You cannot define it in digits in your wallet.
No.
it's not going to be there.
So away from work, what do you do to, we talked from the outset as to that natural curiosity you're blessed with. What do you do to unwind and relax?
I think I've recently discovered the beauty of meditation. I think that's probably part of the way you can maintain the resilience in very difficult situations if you really practice that a sufficient amount. I think that's a great resource, and being that, practicing mindfulness in general, it's in line with the answering question why you do what you do. Like it's all there. It's all coherent. And going for a walk in the nature, traveling, these things where you're able to shift your mind away, or do a little hobby. But to be honest, lately there's not so much hobby. I'm a great coffee enthusiast as well, so part of the discovery of new things you can do with it. And, the exploration of tastes is a great thing as well. Like, why do you make things as taste the way they are?
Are you a reader? And imagine, away from academic readings, are you a reader? And what are you reading currently?
I wish I was more reading than I'm reading, but I think that there's different types of books. But I think a few things I would probably recommend everybody to put on their bookshelf is the book by, actually there's two books. You probably know, most of the people know them. They ended up being bestsellers, but for a good reason. As Yuval Noah Harari's, the two books that he wrote, Homo Sapiens and Homo Deus. I really think they're super important to take a fresh look on our society and like the way how we function, all of us, and the kind of true reasons for some of the motivations in our lives. So that's definitely a thing to maybe even reread, I would say.
And looking back, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
I think I would just say keep going. Don't stop. Don't doubt. Less doubt.
Do you think, though, that doubt's an interesting one, isn't it? That by doubting actually sometimes can be what drives you through? Do you think you can go one of two ways with doubt? It can either put a handbrake on, or actually, I suspect that curiosity that you've evidenced consistently throughout our conversation might just drive you to understand why is that there and how do I resolve it? I suspect it might maybe drive you in some way.
But I think, if you're talking about 21-year-old, I think for me personally, have less doubt.
I suspect that's quite a consistent theme with most people who've appeared on the podcast. Indeed, most people with whom I engage might ask that question. I think doubt is it's something we have, people have in varying degrees of all of our lives. We acquire it, don't we? Maybe through our teens is when because I suspect, to your point, maybe are we naturally born with it? I don't know. It's the whole nature-nurture debate, but we certainly acquire it at certain points, and it becomes more prevalent, I think, in adulthood, or certainly early adulthood.
That's true. I think
it's an interesting point.
It's. I think it's fairly coherent in most people you say, but again, it's lack of experience. So you start doing things which you've never ever done before, and most of the things you do at that point is something you've never ever done before. So there's a lot of questions and uncertainty, and this is how you deal with uncertainty. So, the thing I learned is you have to accept that it's there and just get going with it and make a decision.
Yeah, and I think we have with this constant conflict between certainty and uncertainty. We all crave a broad sweeping statement for which I apologise, but we all crave certainty, and yet uncertainty is a natural part of every day for all of us. We never quite exactly, truly, specifically know when we get up in the morning. We like to think we have a plan. We like to think how our day might shape out, but there'll always be twists and turns along the way. And we've always got, I think it's part of human nature, we've got this certainty-uncertainty conflict currently presents us with challenges.
Oh, absolutely. And I think reflecting on COVID, it just hit everybody badly who was craving the certainty. And it's probably the way we kind of perceive it, risk aversion. And it's easier to have peace of mind if you're completely certain about things. But at the same time, it's not the way where the world works. There's always some random things that might happen. And if you're just accept the fact that it's uncertain, You just need to manage it. Here's the better way to manage it. And you just find a better way to do it other than trying to deny it, reject it, hide away from it.
I think it's interesting that if we reflect back on the lessons of, or I'm not saying that rarely does man not learn the lessons from history, but I'm struck as to how many times we don't necessarily reflect back and think, well, it's happened before, it'll happen again. You know, the example being a pandemic, none of us are, well, I suspect there are some who may well have predicted, I don't know, but some that would have predicted that there was a pandemic is an inevitable outcome from humanity, because they've appeared consistently throughout history. Conflict, recession, economic meltdown. We constantly repeat these cycles, and yet we're all equally amazed when they occur. And I think it's very interesting as to that we maybe don't place as quite so much stock on history as possibly we should.
It's probably one of the post-World War II features in our society when we got to a habit of being able to predict things. And for example, even again, go into technology, away from the society. But we have this thing called property ladder concept. It didn't exist 100 years ago. There were ladders and there was property, but those two were separate things. You could have a ladder inside a property, but it wasn't you wouldn't consider it that procedural. You got a home, you have it, and that's it.
And particularly the concept of home ownership in the sense that we recognise it today versus pre-Second World War, particularly certainly pre-First World War. You had a proliferation of a small number of wealthy landowners who let properties to people who work the land. It's a bit simplistic, but rent was order of the day. Whereas you look at it now, it's so home ownership, property ladder, it's a relatively new phenomenon.
Yeah, and then if you put it in a human history perspective, so so many things changed, and it gives you this ability to to trick yourself into thinking that this can be, you can exactly know the path of your life there, plus minus. You don't know which property you're going to buy, but you kind of know how it's going to work out. Or you sort of think about it like that. Think about the digital technology, so the Moore's law. So we're used to the fact that every year there's a new device coming out, there's a new update, and it's almost I'm waiting for 2 years down the line, I'm going to upgrade this, or I'm going to do that. Or, if you car ownership, it's the same thing. So I've got this lease, so, upgrade it in 3 years from now when the warranty runs out. And it gives you that sense of predictability around everything, whilst in reality, it's just been a very unique situation in history where it was possible to arrange things like that. And that's because of the lack of major conflict, better cross-societal management. But we also see that it's a very fragile equilibrium that can be very easily broken. And even quantum technology doesn't follow the same development path. It just goes in steps, and in between there might nothing happen. Okay. Obvious, but then there's a huge change, and it's like a boom, out of nowhere. So imagine tomorrow there is 100 million qubit computer unveiled by somebody. That means that everything we currently have in terms of security infrastructure is done. It doesn't exist. You just literally switch off your laptop, you go back to paper.
Wow.
And that could happen. How do you know it's not going to happen? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows. I had a fascinating guest on the podcast, Andy Hibbert, as a business called CarShare, and we were talking about the concept of car ownership, off mic, actually, and the sense that future generations won't own cars. It's incomprehensible. I grew up with this driver to, my first car, I was desperate to buy my first car. Typically, I know people still buy cars, but increasingly we've been through the whole leasing model, and moving forward, I think we'll get to a point whereby when we need a car, we'll tap on our phones and one will appear outside the door. That's
perfect. I'm waiting for that to happen.
That's just a theory, an idea. Yeah, it'd certainly have an impact. I'd be the same. So I think there's so many things that, the possibilities are endless. That's hugely exciting. I wonder if this period, Max, will be studied in much the same way as the Industrial Revolution would have been studied, continues to be studied. I wonder if this period of history, by way of a technological revolution, will be studied in much the same way. And I suspect we're we may be right at the beginning of it, even though we might not feel it. I suspect we might be right at the beginning of it in the sense of humankind's place here on this earth. I wonder if in future generations will study this period and look back and think, wow, that was right at the start of what has been some enormous change, and clearly quantum being at the forefront of much of that, I suspect.
It's very much possible, and I think, but again, you don't know until you're through it. So does it start last year? Maybe it's going to start tomorrow, 2 years later. So very much likely. And just think about even though we think we can plan it, think about how dynamic is technology development. When, we moved away from using dial-up internet, how many years ago? Well, maybe 20, 15, depending where, locality. But it's not so long ago. Like the first iPhone was released in 2004, if I remember correctly. So that's the beginning of the smartphones. At that point, you didn't know what to do with it. Like, it was great. Some people knew, but it was fairly niche. Right now, it's like, what do you do without one? And it's not so long, 15 years.
Yeah, it's no time at all, is it? So what does other than IPO, what does the future look like for you?
I'll continue getting challenges in deep tech and figuring out the solutions to them. I think that's super exciting, and making great business.
And where can people go to find out more about that great business?
Well, reach out to me on LinkedIn, go on our website, which is going to be refreshed pretty soon. Send me a direct message somewhere, but best on LinkedIn, I suppose. And
it's aegiq.com, is that right? aegiq.com, aegiq.com.
That's correct.
And to your point, they can find you on LinkedIn too. So I'm sure you'll be getting some interesting questions coming through. Max, it's been great to speak with you this morning. I really appreciate your time. It's a fascinating subject that we've barely skimmed in an hour. I mean, clearly you've devoted years to it, continue to devote years to it, and I've done it little by way of service in just under an hour. But I really appreciate the time to speak with you. I wish you and your colleagues continued success in all your ventures and indeed with Aegiq, and look forward to watching you continue to flourish.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I think it was a very exciting conversation. In fact, I also appreciate that we touched on the grander scheme of things, other than diving deep into the quantum physics. I think that was very interesting for me as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Max, wishing you all the best, and my thanks again. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening to today's Astrology podcast. I really appreciate your audience and ears. If you've enjoyed it, then why not hop onto iTunes and give us a review? I'd really appreciate anything that you might have to say. Any feedback always gratefully received, and look forward to hosting you next time. See you soon. Just a reminder, today's podcast is brought to you by Progresso Talent Partners. Visit www.progressotalent.com today for more information.